What's happened to American politics is reflective of our society. I mean, after all, politics reflects society.
Washington has certainly changed, and not for the better. It clearly is more partisan, more ideological, and as a result, much more gridlocked.
There has developed an intolerance of others' opinions. That has divided our country in a very, I think, dangerous way.
The minority is always looking to frustrate the majority. Well, then when the minority becomes the majority, the new minority wants to frustrate them.
It's not a virtue to compromise or to find consensus to move a country forward. Democracies can only work with consensus.
So our political system is just dysfunctional right now, and it's not serving the public well.
This country is deeply divided on fundamental issues.
You bunch of commies! That's what you are!
Those divisions are deep and they're bitter and they're real.
Hell no, you can't!
I see this as a continuation of the very intense culture war in this country.
We are going to vote our values.
Passions are high, emotions are raw. The electorate is split right down the middle.
Do you think the Democrats give a rat's ass about me?
The divided media sources of the so-called divided reds and blues.
The red state, blue state partisan divide, it's about as wide as it could possibly be.
I set out to go from coast to coast to find out what it is that divides us. It's all that you hear these days. Democrats versus Republicans, conservatives versus progressives, red versus blue. Every single issue we face becomes a battle, pitting one party against the other. Our political conversations become little more than picking a side. What does that mean? What does that really tell us about who we are, or what our differences are? The real differences between red staters and blue staters. And with this rampant partisanship, there's no chance of having a real dialogue about what it is that divides us. I figured out 6 questions about this split that I most wanted answers to. 6 questions to ask everyone that I meet, Republicans, Democrats, Americans from all walks of life, to try to find that civil discourse that we just don't seem to have anymore.
Why do you continue to support a Nazi policy, as Obama has?
Guilty! Fascist!
This is the part you just want to close your eyes and not look. This is about partisanship. It's about politics.
Let me tell you how bad it's got. I have some friends who are on different political parties than I am. And we have gotten to the point where we're just drawn as crews. We do not discuss it. Period. Now, what kind of an attitude is that?
You know, we don't really like to mention politics and stuff like that as far as, you know, family conversations. Because it's too ugly.
I spent election night in the town of West Yellowstone, Montana, with this Republican guy. I had asked him a couple questions, and he finally got to the point where he said to me, I can't even talk about this. It just makes me so angry. We have to change the subject right now.
It's very divided because they just can't see the other side. I mean, you talk to Democrats and all they talk about are these
conservative,
heartland,
redneck,
gay-hating, gun-toting,
crazy, anti-science,
raving, radical,
right-wing, religious,
Bible-thumping,
Jesus freaks,
clearly uneducated,
doing whatever they do, burning crosses and killing homosexuals.
But on the other side, they just see, you know, these
rich,
wine and cheese,
arrogant, latte drinking,
Hollywood,
elitist,
Jane Fonda, Whoopi Goldberg,
George Soros's of the world,
freebasing cocaine,
smoking weed,
having sex with everybody they see,
and sort of plotting the corruption of their children. They really feel that way. You know, both sides are kind of right, but they have less in common now than I think they've ever had.
Well, first of all, there are no red states and there are no blue states. What there are blue urban metropolises and red counties and red small towns and red rural areas. If you try to divide it up, city versus rural, city versus exurban, all of a sudden those differences make sense.
2/3 of the electorate in New York State lives in New York City. If you look at California, the same way. If you look at each state, county by county, I think then you get the real picture. It's really more of a rural-urban divide than entire states going one way or the other.
One could argue that there are more urban blues and more rural reds, but that's still not adequate. Coastline versus Midland, that's still not adequate. It's cultural.
This culture war stuff is extremely powerful. It explains your place in the universe. It explains your frustration with life.
Now, friends, I'm just an average American, but I'm an American, and some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil.
It speaks to the hard done by and to average people out in the Midwest, and it speaks to their anger.
The Republicans, in my opinion, have wisely pitched some of these bedrock value issues to many of these Americans who may feel marginalized, but they can cling to the notion that the America that we once knew stood for these principles.
And people resent that. They resent the notion that, you know, people they don't know who live in Malibu and who don't share their values, and more to the point, don't share their culture, are deciding what their lives are like. That's what it's about.
I got some young grandkids there, and most of these shows you see, I don't even like to see them watch them, you know. It's an everyday thing now. Everything is sex. Have you noticed that? But the morals, I think, went to pieces. Maybe I'm old-fashioned.
What we've seen in the media is it's all about morals, and the heartland, if you will, is not in step at all with the coast. So we're two different countries.
In the heartland, I think we do have a lot more of God and family and morality. I'm not saying that on the east, on the coasts, that there's not. Sorry, that's my wife calling.
As a Christian, it became a really like, if you're a Christian, you should vote this way. And it was very obvious it was like, as a Republican. So I was really torn up about it, to be really honest.
221 years ago, a group of men gathered and launched America's improbable experiment in democracy. The document they produced was eventually signed, but ultimately unfinished. It was stained by this nation's original sin of slavery.
The other factor has always been in American politics, not for Ken Burns to figure this one out, and that's race. You know, it's still unfinished business in America today. It's a particular factor because most white Republicans still see the Democrats as apologizing for the politics of racial entitlement and things that just make average white people uncomfortable.
The Republican Party today has become an almost exclusively white party. It has very few minority members. It's not really trying effectively to appeal to blacks, Latinos, even Asian Americans are predominantly Democratic. Given the long-term demographic trends, the Republican base is demographically a shrinking base.
That is racially polarized, divided America. These forces have been led to think that affirmative action, including women and people of color, is against their cultural interests.
If you look at the map of blue and red, when you look at a map in 1850 when there was slavery and territories where slavery was allowed, it's almost the same thing. I think that there is a racial undercurrent in all of this.
If you were going to add to the division in this country, I think you'd have to add on the economic disparity that we see growing. This is becoming a two-class society. The concentration of wealth without restraint, the concentration of wealth without oversight, a greater feeling of have and have not. As the country grows more diverse economically, between those who are making $100,000 a year and those who are making 10, that polarization is probably going to continue.
Yes, I think there is a definite split. You know, the reasons.
What's that split based on?
I think it's income. the rich tend to vote Republican, where the working class tends to vote more Democratic.
The people that typically work for a living, have to make payrolls, have to understand what it takes to run a small business or run their household or pay taxes, tend to be conservative. I can't explain it, but it's the elite, wealthy, the George Soroses of the world and the Kennedys and all the wealthy people tend to be Democrats anymore, tend to be liberal, and I don't understand that exactly. I don't know why.
How is it that we as Americans now, we look at the same image and we see two completely different pictures? Same day, spoke to two guys, agreed that we're divided, even agreed that we're divided along economic lines, and one of them is convinced that it's Democrats that are wealthy, and the other one is as sure that it's Republicans that are the rich ones. The more I talk to people, the more I came to understand that you can divide this country according to almost any single characteristic you choose. Crime, poverty, income, stock ownership, charity, housing, divorce, marriage, residency. I even read an article that used wild hog population as an indicator of a county's likelihood to vote Republican. All this does nothing more than prove that there are as many ways to look at this country as there are people in it. But if there's one thing I realized, it's that while the Electoral College map is a political portrait, when you look at maps from elections past, you see that it's a temporary portrait. It's not a permanent reflection of who or how we are.
It seems like the only thing that Americans can actually agree on these days is that we're more divided than ever before. We've gone from one nation indivisible to a bunch of liberals and conservatives who love to just kick the crap out of each other. It hasn't always been this way. Or has it? The Founding Fathers were bound together by a conviction to protect man's inalienable rights. But just to be on the safe side, they drafted a constitution so they could have it in writing. It's a tale of collective vision, shared destiny, and mutual respect we all know very well. But we often forget how divided they actually were. Of the 55 delegates who attended the Constitutional Convention, only 39 actually signed the damn thing. Arguments that had raged over states versus federal rights, and especially those concerning slavery, did not simply disappear with ratification. Over the course of the next century, growing tension between the industrialized economies of the North and the agrarian economies of the South only escalated. Lincoln's election and his pledge to eliminate slavery lit the fuse, igniting the Civil War. The Civil War pretty much kicked everyone's ass when you think about it. And even though everybody was still kind of pissed at each other, we were still able to enter the 20th century together, full of hope. But history would repeat itself. This America divided stuff has been going on since the Mayflower. It's part of our national fabric, if not the very backdrop against which our story plays out. So does that mean the current red state, blue state divide has us more divided than ever before? Or are we simply doing what Americans have always done?
100 years ago, the difference between the two parties was regional. North of the Mason-Dixon line, you were Republican. South of the Mason-Dixon line, you were Democrat. That was pretty much it.
Democrats had Southern conservatives. Republicans had moderates. The middle dominated, and the parties found coalitions that cut across the party lines.
And what we've had really since 1980 is a sorting out where all of the conservatives are now in the Republican Party and all of the liberals are now in the Democratic Party.
The parties realigned along ideological lines, right? You no longer have the Dixiecrats who are Southern conservatives in the Democratic Party. You no longer have Northern liberals in the Republican Party.
The parties became more polar and more like parliamentary parties.
But what's also true here is that there's a real interactive effect. As members of Congress have polarized, the larger political environment increasingly mirrors that and is polarizing. We have tribal politics in some ways now in Washington. It's starting to happen more out in the country.
The lack of progress on many of the most important issues facing our country is a direct result of this polarization, which has now brought us to a paralysis. This idea that I'm all right, you're all wrong, has really set in on not only the fringes, which always have been there, of the parties, but now it's essentially controlled the mainstream. You cannot have a streak of intolerance that dominates the process, and unfortunately, that's what's happened.
You gotta find a side and take it. I've taken a side.
On the Navajo Nation reservation, I got a first-hand look at how destructive partisanship can be.
There's no jobs. I mean, I'm not working on it. I'm unemployed. So this is how I make ends meet, you know. A lot of people make their money this way.
Yet this had all taken a back seat to the fact that the nation's leaders were no longer on speaking terms. Partisanship had trumped addressing their own survival. But the people themselves, like so many others I'd been meeting, were eager to talk about politics. So why is it so difficult for us to engage in constructive dialogue as a nation?
We don't have debates anymore. We stay on message. The debates now, which is the only chance for the two candidates to actually have a discourse, are just two monologues. And our pundit class, in fact, praises the lack of discourse. I mean, what's the chief virtue that is always praised right after a debate by the pundits? Well, the candidate stayed on message. And it's like a composition paper in 4th grade. Tell them what you're going to tell them, tell them what you told them. That's now how a candidate approaches every debate.
One of the ideas of the founders of the country would be that the political cycle would be a really productive, creative process of airing new ideas and new solutions and testing these solutions with the people. And substantive ideas would come to the fore and it would shape the policy direction of the country.
Have you ever seen the famous Nixon-Kennedy debates? People talk about them all the time. And when you watch it, what you realize is that Richard Nixon, for whatever you want to say about Richard Nixon, he might be the last man to have ever thought live on television. When you watch him, when he's pulling at his face and like making these kind of wild gestures, he's actually thinking up his answer. Something that doesn't happen anymore.
It is true that if you heard the debate on radio, you thought that Nixon won hands down. If you saw it on television, you knew that Kennedy had just blown him away. What all political consultants and candidates learned from that debate was, boy, you better be prepared. You better be ready. You better rehearse. Well, rehearse means trying out various lines and see what works the best, and then learn it.
The First Amendment enshrined Madison's marketplace of ideas, where he said, falsehood will never stand a chance in a fair competition of ideas, in a marketplace of ideas. Truth will always win out. But that presumes that, you know, you're going to have a debate.
Our forefathers beamed with pride. Because the Founding Fathers knew the nation's success depended upon its citizens being well informed, they made sure that information could flow freely. The First Amendment protected and guaranteed the right of peaceful assembly, as well as a free press. This freedom ensured that the rule of reason prevailed, the belief that in a free and open encounter, truth will invariably triumph. Even with falsehoods as part of the debate, they trusted that people would make the right choice where it mattered most, in the voting booth. But the vitality of this marketplace of ideas is not as robust as it once was. Where once ordinary citizens were actively engaged in discussing the issues of the day, we are now mere onlookers in a debate that takes place almost exclusively over the airwaves. In fact, 78% of Americans now cite campaign ads as their primary source for political information. When freedom of press and speech falters, and the marketplace of ideas fails, it's almost impossible for us to fulfill the most essential civic obligation we have, making the informed voter decisions that keep our government in check. Unfortunately, there's no quicker path to voter disenfranchisement than being excluded from the process.
It turns out the extremes are much more lucrative fundraising bases. It's easier to raise money if you're extreme left inside of an extreme left district than it is to be a moderate. And same thing on the right.
The primary voters tend to be the more ideologically committed in both parties. At the national level, it's very difficult for any moderate really to survive.
Because Congress has architected so many of its districts to be safe districts, it allows people in those districts to move to the extremes without fear of consequence.
And so there's a desire or a need, perhaps on both sides, to cater to those with the strongest feelings and to emphasize those issues that make those people write checks.
One of the results of the increasingly deliberate partisan divisiveness as a tactic has been that day-to-day discourse has been coarsened down, has been made much more difficult, and mistrust is deliberately used in order to exclude the possibility of dissent. And it works.
Is it becoming too difficult to discuss politics now?
I think it is. I really do. Because there's anger. When you start discussing it, people get mad.
I don't talk about politics to my friends or stuff because I know how I feel, and if I can't convince them how I feel, then why bother?
Why bother? I mean, you're not going to change any minds. You're not going to suggest something that's going to say, well, yeah, you know, if you'll do that, I'll do this. There's just that compromise isn't there. That reconciliation of contending differences that a politician is supposed to be able to forge in a community. You don't see it at state level either.
We've let it get personal. When you let something get personal, then you really have fractured any ability to build any base of consensus. We've defined that down to the lowest negative, raw meat political denominator in party politics today.
I've been around here 20-some years. First time I've ever seen a member denied an extra minute or two to finish his remarks. I don't know what's happening here in this body, but I think it's wrong.
If you want to see this very clearly, you should go back and look at a memo that Lyndon Johnson's Senate liaison wrote to him in 1965. He wrote a memo and he said, look, given who won in the election, if Medicare comes up for a vote tomorrow and all of our people are present and voting, we win 55 to 45. Now, you would never write that memo today. Something happened between now and then that led the Senate to begin working off of a 60-vote requirement that didn't exist in previous times in American history.
It's really in the last 15 years that the filibuster has become a routine part of our lawmaking process, and it's a part that really empowers the minority in a very polarized political climate, making it extremely hard to pass important legislation. Washington once said that we needed to have a Senate to cool the coffee. Now I think, unfortunately, the Senate is freezing the coffee.
Maybe the worst leadership failure is the readiness to disrespect your opponent.
And you are one sick, pathetic devil.
That sort of attitude, that take no prisoners attitude, when that filters down in the public realm, in the public square, in discourse, that's bad. That's corrosive. That divides us.
Because you're supporting that son of a who's up this whole planet. And that makes you an enemy. Straight up.
Part of what I think has been going on to some extent is voters are self-selecting places to live partly on the basis of politics.
In other words, everybody in South Paris, Maine, okay, which is a little town in western Maine, who has a certain worldview, all 9 of them, are already living in Manhattan because they don't fit in there, right? People who have the worldview of the majority of South Paris, stay there.
The people that I interact with, the people I do business with on a daily basis, 95% of the people I deal with were conservative, they're
predominantly vote Republican.
Maybe it's, again, an issue with our generation where we tend not to stay where we grew up, that it's a very mobile society now. So I think you can see a sort of a polarizing shift being reinforced by people moving out of regions they feel are hostile.
We're living in neighborhoods that are defined much more strongly by who we end up voting for, and hang out with people who share our general outlook.
You can't connect in the easy way that existed when I was really coming along. So I think we're going to have some turbulent times in terms of trying to identify our points of common interests.
What had made the biggest impression on me so far was that even though there's a desire to discuss our political differences, in practice, it's not always that easy.
This is a perfect example. You have a desk opposite somebody who's a Democrat. How does that play out for you personally?
If you're politically savvy, you get it, you're a Republican. If you're an idiot, you're a Democrat. How's that one?
Here's the idiot. And these days, it's nearly impossible to talk about politics without getting into faith and morality.
All these hippies and these gays and all this other thing affect the common, normal people, don't get involved in that. But it's there, you got to deal with it, right?
This struggle, where faith meets politics, where the one ends and the other begins, it's where our country gets stuck as well. Faith, in many ways, is at the heart of the culture wars.
The mobilization of the conservative Christian community, the Christian right, over the last 25 years or so has actually had a big effect on the way we talk politically about moral values. And so I think that has consolidated in some way this tendency to talk about religion and values as though they're the same thing, and that there can't be values outside of religious belief.
Everyone has a set of values. They may not be terribly conscious of it, or they may be very conscious of it. What's important to you, what's not? What's your instinct between right and wrong? Maybe what we ought to say is, let's talk about values across the board.
You cannot have every individual say what is right to me is right and you can't infringe on it. There has to be a basis. There has to be an agreement on where the line is.
There are other moral issues that are important as well. There's more than 3,000 verses in the Bible that talk about caring for the poor, and the religious right tends to gloss over that.
I agree those are priorities. Biblically, we're commanded to care for the sick, the elderly, for the widowed, and for the orphaned. But if we don't have right what is a life, and if we don't have right what is a family, then every other legislative action we take, every dollar amount we spend is applying a tourniquet to a flesh wound.
I think it's impossible to discuss moral values, for instance, without discussing a war.
We've never had a war where we've had a tax cut during a war in the history of this country until now. Is it moral to give these people tax cuts during a time of war and have our children or our grandchildren have to pay for that?
If you're for God, you're against gays. If you're for God, you're against abortion. If you're for God, you're for Iraq. So we've kind of put, whether we want to or not, just by the overlay of it, a religious connotation on questions that weren't historically religious.
The split between the mainline churches in America and the evangelical and fundamentalist churches occurred at the beginning of the 20th century over this issue of political involvement. Evangelical fundamentalist churches tended to draw people away from politics because they were interested in saving souls. They were not interested in politics. That organizational power is currently being channeled in a direction of support for Republican candidates.
In the 80s, that was done through the Christian Coalition. It was done through Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. And they started putting the little leaflets in the pews, in the churches, on the Sunday before the Tuesday that you voted. Those leaflets, if you read them, I mean, they're not really about the general election. What they say is, here are the two candidates' positions. And they tend to list the ones that will excite the base the most.
If we had a playbook of strategy, I think that's what we would see. Use this language, talk about these words.
God-fearing people, and we must say we will not tolerate violent anymore!
We're here today to have our generation be the one to say, you know, we've had enough of this. We want it stopped now.
If you look at issues like gay marriage and abortion even, most of these are not solvable legally. They don't get solved. And it seems to me wise leaders of a diverse nation will look at issues like that and try very hard to bring people together to manage the issue, to manage its social impact and its political impact, rather than trying to win. As soon as you start to try to win these things, in my mind, you fail the leadership test.
God probably doesn't care what happens to the Dow Jones or what happens to Medicare or what happens to jobs, but I think that he probably does care about the sanctity of life and the sanctity of marriage and those kinds of things.
How I see it, I'd rather be put out of a job than vote for somebody who is for abortion.
I took my son to a hardware store. I showed him a bolt and a nut, and I said, these fit together. He says, yes. So I picked up a bolt and another bolt, and I said, can these fit together? He says, no. I said, well, why are people trying to put these two together where they cannot fit? I said, God has made us to be fitted together. There's a purpose behind everything. So those are some of the moral values I teach to my children. It's got to start somewhere.
We are one of the two most religious countries in the West, Ireland being the other example. Our polling numbers in terms of some of the basic indicators, do you believe in God, do you believe in an afterlife, do you attend church or synagogue, compared to European countries, for example, we're off the charts.
The whole notion of the separation of church and state, I think, is one that is much more embraced by the intellectual elite. You're right, the DNA of our nation does not embrace this more rigid academic notion of separation of church and state.
It is wrong to have religion not in the public sphere. People of faith will run and talk about it, that's fine. But to have religion control the public space, and that you're either with us or against us based on doctrinal views that you don't compromise, that's not a democracy.
When France has been on 6 constitutions, when we've only got 1, despite the fact they always lecture us on enlightenment, okay? The reason ours has endured and theirs has not is because we have a line. We specifically put into writing where our values and where our rights come from. Not from a king, not from a state, not from a political party, not from a university, not from a culture, but from a creator.
People forget that the founding fathers were atheists and that their role was not to save the church from the state, but to save the state from the church.
After so many sincere conversations about faith and religious belief, I came to appreciate for the first time how essential a role they play in our national life, and that this is true all across the country. It's just as much the case in the Southwest as it is in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt as in the Bible Belt. That's why faith was often described to me as more important than policy when running for public office.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
And candidates have always recognized the power of highlighting their religious belief in their political message.
The most important thing in my life is Jesus Christ.
I was asked once what book I would choose if I were shipwrecked on an island for the rest of my life. The Bible.
What political philosopher or thinker do you most identify with and why?
Christ, because he changed my heart.
What does it mean to you to trust in Christ?
It means I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins and that I am redeemed through him.
But there is no message without media. In fact, it's impossible to discuss politics in this day and age without dealing with the incredibly pervasive role that the media plays in it, and in our lives. The irony is that the one thing that connects us all is also the thing that we often single out as further dividing us.
East Coast
media has really made this red-blue thing into more of it than what it really is.
Fox TV, which to me is the most anti-democratic thing I can think of.
The three major networks on TV, they're slanted liberal. And, you know, the funny part is that they don't want to admit it.
The main media, the CNN and the Fox News and all the crazy with the lights and the noise and the all kinds of stuff. It just doesn't really make any sense.
So to understand this better, I headed to the media capital of the world, New York City. Whoa. There's no better place to get a sense of the power and scope of the media in our country and how we as a nation are obsessed by it.
The media are the most powerful institutions on earth right now. They are the way we come to understand each other. They're the way we come to know the rest of the world.
TV is what Americans share. You know, it's sort of our national town hall. America's just too big for all of us to ever get together anywhere, right? So we know what America looks like because we see it on television.
I've not really seen the world, but that's what they say. You see that on TV, they say we're all divided.
The media establishes what the issues are. It broadcasts them to the nation. It says, this is what people care about, this is what matters, these are the problems that are confronting the country today, and these are how people feel about them.
The whole role of the national news media to be mediators of information, to say, you know, this is what's going on, not think this or that, but here are the things you should be thinking about. That's an amazing decline. You know, when I was your age, 70 or 80 or 90% of America watched either ABC, CBS, or NBC, and what's more, believed it.
Traditionally, the way America's news media evolved, as opposed to Europe's, was on the basis of the wire services, and that a wire service had to print in both Democratic and Republican newspapers, so they had to kind of write it down the middle. That created a tradition of nonpartisan coverage that became our model.
So that created a kind of common narrative for the country that you could react against or, you know, whatever. But now, I mean, forget that. I mean, that era is over.
The reason that you've seen things like Fox News and talk radio emerge is because they represent a viewpoint that many millions of Americans thought was not being represented. You know, nature abhors a vacuum. And if there is something not filling that void, something will always rise up to do so, particularly in a capitalistic system which financially rewards you for doing it.
We get on the air now because of the extremeness of our views. And part of that's driven by the competition within the media industry. So who's got the most exciting story? Who's got the best story? Who's got the quickest story? You see it not only in your talk show hosts, you see it in your editorial writers. Consensus builders don't sell newspapers, don't get on radio, don't get on Sunday morning TV, and they don't draw ratings.
And if you happen to be a publicly held company and you have a fiduciary duty to your shareholders to maximize their profits, which is what the law does say, then you try and maximize your viewership. And if a fairly hard-edged message, one way or the other, does that, well, then that's what you tend to do. And that has served actually an important role in the bifurcation of the electorate, because they don't really hear from voices on the other side, or they don't hear from voices in the middle.
There is no discourse. There is a so-called left and the right yelling at each other. So that has become a kind of model for take no prisoners, there is no middle ground.
It's no longer a serious discussion about the issues, and even on the right, the figures who have substantive things to say, you tend to see less and less of in favor of these characters like Ann Coulter, who are just political performance artists.
A lot of it has to do with the concentration of media ownership and power in the hands of what ultimately are corporate interests, so that the individual journalists don't have as much say as perhaps they once did. And I think that there is a tremendous chilling effect that if you know you're working for GE and Viacom, et cetera, are you going to go digging into things that really undercut corporate values in this country?
In the 1970s, there was a multitude of media companies, hundreds in fact. And this diversity of media ownership helped to ensure diversity of information. The FCC's early restrictions on media ownership helped to preserve this. The 1996 Telecommunications Act abolished much of the previous media ownership regulation, and a new era was born. But rather than foster competition, The Telecommunications Act opened the floodgates to historic industry consolidation, reducing the number of major media companies from around 80 in 1986 to a mere 7 today. 7 companies that control 90% of the marketplace, nearly all the news we get. And by determining what's news, they also decide what the issues are that we as a nation debate. So, even though we have hundreds of cable channels, magazines, radio stations, and newspapers at our fingertips, does having more options really mean that we have more choices?
We've all inserted ourselves in a kind of echo chamber of our own devising because we get to build it ourselves. And everybody can, if you want to click on 20 blogs that confirm your view, if you want to watch 3 cable channels and subscribe to 2 magazines, all of that is available, and all of that will completely mesh with what you already know to be true.
I mean, cable is just, it's just made it possible for people to watch just what they want to watch. It narrowcasts to each different segment within society, and so people aren't exposed as much as they used to be to other people's worlds.
Mainstream news organizations like CNN, like the Washington Post, like the New York Times, are then come to be understood as the liberal side, right? So in an ideological world where everything is divided up, nothing is objective.
Very few of us challenge our core values or core beliefs. Most of us, most of the time, gather those things we like and appeal to us. And in that, we find evidence that we're right and the other side is wrong.
If Fox News didn't report it, then I don't believe it. I mean, if CNN came out and said, Jesus really did walk out of that tomb on the 3rd day, I might consider paganism. That's how little I trust what they have to say.
You can even agree on the facts because, CNN says one thing and Fox News says something else.
And there's all kinds of folks on the left that if CNN doesn't say it, then it must not be true.
So, you can't argue. And I think that's why so many people have walked away.
Don't look, stop the BS here. Stop the crap. Come on, you coward. Say the truth. What do you mean, coward? You're a coward. You blame everybody else.
We have a news media that is just feeding off the conflict and indeed feeding the conflict and not informing Americans very well about what's really up for debate. It's sort of a perfect recipe for a political disaster.
While talking with people about the media in politics, I learned that most of the country is a foregone conclusion long before election night. The only states that matter are the ones that are too close to call. These swing states are the ones that decide who moves into the White House. They become the front lines in the red state, blue state culture wars. And when every vote counts, campaigns focus on topics guaranteed to mobilize voters.
This is Alabama. We speak English. If you want to live here, learn it.
There is an ideal, still held by many, that the election process is our opportunity to openly debate issues of the day that affect us as a nation, and hopefully find a middle ground that serves the common good.
The way you win elections these days is to identify your base, understand exactly who they are demographically, and go find more people just like them. Forget about the middle. Make sure your base votes.
Democratic strategy has always been to simply register as many voters as you can and then get out the vote as best as you can. Republican strategy has been slightly different because they're outnumbered in most places, even in red states, still. The Republican strategy has always been to drive down voter turnout, generally. The best way to do that is to go negative. Nothing turns a voter off like a negative campaign. You will drive overall numbers straight into the toilet.
There's been a debate in national politics for over 20 years about negative campaigning. It's bad, it's awful, everybody writes about it every other day, talks about it, but at the end of the day, it works.
There was no message being gotten across because one was burying the other one, and it just, you get tired of 22 minutes an hour of political commercials.
The whole process is just screwed up anymore to the point where it's who can sling the most mud, who can distort it completely till you get to the point where it's like, what the hell were we voting for anyways?
Well, my friend, if it's any consolation, you're not alone. It's not surprising that you're confused. But beyond all the words, there's actually just one big thing on which most people base their final decision. The man.
People discovered, Roger Ailes was one of them, that you could make commercials for candidates that actually elected them to office.
I pledge to you, we shall have an honorable end to the war in Vietnam.
This time, vote like your whole world depended on it.
And what are they? They are often the consequence of polls or focus groups that have told the political consultant whom the candidate has hired what's on people's minds. What are they going to respond to?
The last few elections have been rather striking in that they have been almost entirely handed over to the public relations industry to run. The elections are being run by the same people who sell you toothpaste and lifestyle drugs and automobiles and so on.
Every 4 years, we're given a choice between two cars. And we don't buy the one that fits our criteria the best. We buy the one, or we vote for the one, that resonates with us, it feels right to us.
People have to vote on what the industry, the advertising industry, calls qualities or personality. Nice guy, is going to take care of us, good leader, shares my values, looks religious. Obama won the award from the advertising industry for the best marketing campaign of 2008. And if you look at the campaign, you can see it. The red state, blue state division indicates how people differed on their purchase of the imagery sold by the people who advertise toothpaste.
Back now with news of a big change in American politics, one you will almost certainly see on your TV. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned laws on the books for nearly a century and ruled that corporations can spend freely now on political campaigns.
The Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, has given corporate America a green light to capture the political process.
Unfortunately, one of the drivers of the excessive levels of partisanship we have now is the role of big money in politics. Huge now, multi-million-dollar contributions, undisclosed, secret, very often driven by special interest agenda or an ideological agenda.
That is a huge dimension of what's going on, this new surge of unaccountable, unlimited money in the process.
What you realize when you start looking at it, there's 10 transnational corporations that fund both parties to the major degree. So, where's my word? Where's my voice in this? Where's their voice in it?
Once upon a time, this was golden for Democrats. This was their bread and butter. Was speaking to the disenfranchised, the beaten down, people who'd lost their jobs, the people at the bottom. But they don't want to do that anymore, chiefly because they want to be able to get corporate money to run their campaigns with, and you can't get that if you're going to be a left party anymore.
The parties have a monopoly on the system. Interest groups often have a monopoly on the parties. So you wonder why you don't get much difference between party policies. Well, it's because of the influence of money in both parties.
Basically, the election goes to the highest bidder, the candidates who are most successful at raising the maximum special interest money from corporate sponsors. Those are the candidates that win. In my opinion, the ability to raise special interest money is not the skill set that this country needs to rise above its current political and social problems.
The influence of corporate money on this political process can be a death knell for democracy.
I predict both parties will end up ruining the day that we allowed these secret committees with massive amounts of unregulated money to play the role that they are in politics right now.
The one thing that you hear from nearly everyone is that DC has changed, that the partisanship is worse than ever, and that now it's only about party-first politics and divide-and-conquer strategies, rather than what's good for the country.
For 40 years in the House, Democrats had majorities. In almost all of that period, there was really never any serious chance that they lose that majority. Republicans who were there to affect public policy took whatever they could get in the give and take with the majority. Once the Republicans stunningly took that majority, and we moved into an era where each election, easily it could have shifted, it changed the stakes and it drove the parties further apart.
When you have the Democrats controlling Capitol Hill and the White House, the party in opposition is clearly very worried. And they've made a very clear calculation that the way to defeat this president is to just block everything he's trying to do. The better the idea the president comes up with, the more opposition he will get from the Republicans. It was exactly the same with George Bush. George Bush came up with some great ideas that Democrats should have embraced, and they opposed it. Because the minute you compromise with the enemy, you're going to give them results.
If the Republicans came out and they said, you know what, we're with you, and then Barack Obama and the Democrats could go to the voters and say, we did it. We changed the tone in Washington. If you're a Republican, why do you want that to happen? You probably lose your seat. You definitely don't become committee chairman. Your leadership doesn't take power. Your legislation doesn't begin to matter more. All of their incentives are to make sure nobody can govern the country. That's true for Democrats when they're in the minority too.
That kind of stranglehold in D.C. of power by the minority at odds with the American people creates tremendous frustration.
Underneath it all are these very brutal political incentives.
If you break ranks, what happens? You find yourself denouncing the media who represent the base of your political party. Suddenly you're not appointed to the committee that you might want to get appointed to. Suddenly, well, just coincidentally, there's no time for your amendment or your bill to be brought to the floor. Maybe the campaign financing for your campaign is affected. So there are all sorts of ways, subtle and overt, to encourage, force, cajole, however you want to describe it, party solidarity.
We make a terrible conceptual mistake when we think of this in terms of individuals. If this were about individuals doing what they thought was right, people would be acting differently. No one, at the end of the day, is able to buck the forces that govern them. The best way to predict what is going to happen is to look at party incentives.
Independence is not rewarded in Washington. In fact, it's punished. From the day you show up, it's made very clear that you're part of a team, and that really the most important thing, if you want to get ahead, is to support the team. You need to vote with the team on matters large and small, even when they don't need your vote because they think it looks bad. And yet that's what the system demands. For the vast majority of Americans, even Democrats and Republicans who love their party but put their nation first, I think the system would come as a matter of some surprise.
From our political scene today have gone the World War II generation leaders. Those were men and women, Democrats and Republicans, of significant character, who always put America first. They didn't put their parties first, they put America first. They understood their responsibility was to help govern our country, find consensus on the big issues, solve the problems, and move our country forward. They were never confused with that.
It really was a different generation. The trust, the camaraderie that people had forged together by casting tough political votes. My father's first re-election was in 1968. You can't imagine this today. The leader of the Republican Senate caucus came up to my father on the floor of the Senate, put his arm around his shoulder, and asked what he could do to help with his re-election. You would never see this today. That sense of camaraderie, of being in it together, of country first, it's dissipated, and our nation is suffering because of that.
There was a point in this country when political service was public service. I don't think it is anymore. I think those who enter politics, their motivation seems primarily to get reelected, not to serve. And the notion of leadership is lost.
Where's that guy that's not an attorney? Where's that guy that hasn't spent a lifetime as a politician, that maybe owned a grocery store or was a mechanic or was just a salt-of-the-earth guy that says, you know what, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to change. I can't be bought. Those guys don't run anymore. You don't even see them on the local level.
Leadership, by definition, means to be out in front of people, to be out in front in talking about tough issues. And so the sense of public service is risking yourself for your country, and risking your popularity for your country, to try to help meet the challenges before the country.
The people have lost their voice. And you hear that from people all the time. You hear people saying, well, you know, my vote doesn't count, or what I think doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter? It's supposed to. That's what the whole Constitution of this country was built on, the idea that one person, one vote, your vote matters, your voice matters. This is our country.
Until it becomes politically possible for a candidate to take the same position as, say, 80% of the population on issues of prime concern for them. Till that happens, it'll be just a failed state. Formal democratic institutions not functioning.
And right now, there are those who are giving in to the social forces that choose quietness over peace. Quietness is the absence of noise. Peace is the presence of justice. We need not comply with oppression. Keep fighting to use your vote. Keep fighting to use your voice.
I get so frustrated because we have so much promise in this country. I always look at the Constitution, which you've mentioned several times, the promise that it has of a country of equality and freedom. It's just amazing. But when you look at the reality and how everything plays out, whether it's separation of powers or our system of electing our representatives, we've got to do better than this.
We do have an adaptable system. Women can vote. African Americans can vote. We have changed the system many times before in order to ensure that we could govern, given the realities the country is facing at that moment. We just haven't done it yet for the new reality. This is about us, and it keeps repeating, and it will repeat until we do something about it.
What we have lost is a sense of values as Americans as to what this country is. Is it a beacon to the world? Is it a beacon to ourselves? Is it important to us?
Reports of death threats, vandalism, and harassment have House Democrats on edge just as they're preparing to head home for the spring recess.
I have been directly threatened. A bullet was shot through the window of my campaign office in Richmond this week.
We start with these town hall meetings, including the one the president had today in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. A protester who came to the town hall meeting today with a gun.
And on a Michigan congressman's voicemail, a stark warning.
I hope you die.
Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords is one of at least 10 members who Democratic leaders say have been targeted.
The front door of our office had been either kicked out, shot out, or just basically destroyed.
Are you afraid? Are you fearful today?
Our democracy is a light, a beacon really around the world because we affect change at the ballot box and not because of these, outbursts of violence in certain cases.
MSNBC World Headquarters. We are cutting into our program with some breaking news. Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords,
a Democrat with the House of Representatives,
has been shot. She was hosting her first Congress on Your Corner event,
where a congressperson goes back to their district and makes himself available to their constituents.
We are at a crossroads. We must consider carefully if our words and actions will see us live up to the great responsibility that our forefathers entrusted to us, to bequeath our democracy to successive generations in a form more robust and dynamic than how we inherited it. We will never live up to this responsibility with a narrow-minded political vision. We have to change our ways because the challenges we face as a nation demand that we do.
I think ultimately both sides need to understand it's like the old nuclear doctrine of mutually assured destruction, that this is tearing down both sides, it's bringing the entire system into disrepute, and that eventually they need to, Democrats and Republicans, try and elevate their honor and integrity with which they're viewed by changing this system.
Our people expect better. 310 million Americans expect better from their leaders, from their country, and from each other.
At the end of this, the only sure guarantor of American democracy are the people themselves.
It's still the time in the history of man when there's more capacity to deal with the problems, to fix the problems, than ever before. If we fail, then we will fail not because of the problems, but because of our response.